Standing in the mahogany-paneled law office, watching my stepbrother Marcus sneer at me with that familiar look of disgust, I never imagined that Father O'Connor's next words would shatter everything Marcus believed about our family. "You're not even real family," Marcus had whispered moments before, loud enough for everyone to hear. But when the elderly priest opened that sealed envelope and began reading our late father's will, the color drained from Marcus's face so fast I thought he might faint right there on the Persian rug. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss.
The morning started like any other Tuesday in Millbrook Heights, with me rushing to catch the 7:15 bus to my job at Henderson & Associates accounting firm. At 28, I'd grown accustomed to the routine of my modest life in the small Oregon town where I'd lived since I was 12. My stepfather, William Ashford, had brought me here after marrying my mother, and despite his attempts to make me feel welcome, I always sensed I was the outsider looking in. William had passed away 3 weeks earlier from a sudden heart attack, leaving behind a complicated family dynamic that had been brewing for over 16 years. His biological son, Marcus, now 31, had made it abundantly clear from day one that I would never truly belong to the Ashford family. My mother had died in a car accident when I was 23, and since then, the thin thread connecting me to the Ashfords had felt increasingly fragile. Marcus worked as a real estate developer in Portland, driving up to Millbrook Heights in his gleaming black BMW whenever he needed something from his father. He'd built a successful business flipping luxury homes, and his expensive suits and confident demeanor made it obvious he expected to inherit everything William had worked for during his 72 years. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports for Mrs. Chen's bakery. Father O'Connor's gentle voice requested my presence at the law offices of Brennan and Associates the following morning for the reading of William's will. I'd assumed it would be a formality. Perhaps William had left me a small keepsake or a modest sum to help with expenses. Marcus would inherit the family construction business, the sprawling Victorian house on Maple Street, and the various investment properties William had accumulated over the decades. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical weather for October in Oregon. I wore my best black dress, the one I'd purchased for my mother's funeral 5 years earlier, and took extra care with my appearance. The law office occupied the second floor of a historic brick building downtown, its walls lined with legal volumes and framed diplomas that spoke of decades serving Millbrook Heights families. Marcus arrived precisely on time, as always, accompanied by his wife Jennifer and their twin 8-year-old daughters, Chloe and Emma. Jennifer offered me a polite but distant smile, the same expression she'd worn at every family gathering for the past 6 years. She'd never been unkind, but she'd never made any effort to include me either. The twins barely acknowledged my presence, having been raised to understand that I occupied a different category within the family structure. Also present was Margaret Holbrook, William's elderly sister, who'd driven down from Seattle for the occasion. At 75, Margaret moved slowly but maintained the sharp intelligence that had made her a formidable high school principal for over 4 decades. She'd always been kind to me, though our interactions had been limited to holiday visits and the occasional phone call. Father O'Connor entered the conference room carrying a leather briefcase, his silver hair neatly combed and his clerical collar perfectly straight. At 68, he'd served St. Mary's Catholic Church for nearly 30 years and had become one of William's closest friends during the final decade of his life. William had converted to Catholicism after marrying my mother, and Father O'Connor had guided him through that spiritual journey with patience and wisdom. The priest's presence surprised me initially, but I recalled William mentioning that he'd asked Father O'Connor to serve as the executor of his will. William had trusted the priest's judgment implicitly, often seeking his counsel on both business and personal matters. "Thank you all for coming," Father O'Connor began, settling into the chair at the head of the polished conference table. "Before we begin, I want to express my condolences again. William was a remarkable man who touched many lives in this community." Marcus shifted impatiently in his chair, clearly eager to move past the pleasantries. He'd taken a position directly across from me, and I could feel his occasional glances in my direction. Jennifer sat beside him, maintaining her composed expression, while keeping one eye on the twins who were coloring quietly in the corner. William spent considerable time preparing these documents, Father O'Connor continued, removing a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. He wanted to ensure his wishes were clearly expressed and legally sound. The priest broke the wax seal carefully, as if handling a sacred document. Inside were several pages of legal text, along with what appeared to be a personal letter written in William's familiar handwriting. The will is dated 6 months ago and was properly witnessed by myself and attorney David Brennan. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his confidence evident in his posture. He'd probably already mentally cataloged William's assets and begun planning how to manage the inheritance. The construction business alone was worth several $1 million, built from the small carpentry shop William had started in his 20s.
I'll begin with the personal bequests, the priest said, adjusting his reading glasses. To my sister, Margaret Holbrook, I leave my collection of first edition novels and the sum of $50,000, with my gratitude for her constant support and friendship. Margaret nodded graciously, tears gathering in her eyes. She'd been more interested in maintaining a relationship with William than in any potential inheritance. To my granddaughters, Chloe and Emma Ashford, I establish educational trust funds of $25,000 each to be used for their college expenses. The twins looked up from their coloring books with mild curiosity, not yet old enough to fully understand the significance of their grandfather's gift. To my daughter-in-law, Jennifer Ashford, I leave my wife's jewelry collection and the sum of $30,000. Jennifer's eyes widened with genuine surprise and gratitude. William had always been generous, but this exceeded her expectations. Marcus was practically vibrating with anticipation now, assuming these smaller bequests were clearing the way for his major inheritance. His fingers drummed silently on the table as he waited for Father O'Connor to announce his portion of the estate. Now we come to the primary assets, the priest said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. The construction business, the family home, the rental properties, and the majority of the estate. The room fell completely silent except for the soft scratching of the twins' crayons. Even they seemed to sense the importance of this moment. Marcus straightened in his chair, preparing to receive what he considered his birthright. He'd grown up assuming he would someday take over William's business empire, and nothing in his adult life had challenged that assumption. Father O'Connor cleared his throat and began reading directly from the will. To my beloved stepson, Marcus Ashford, I leave the sum of $100,000 and my vintage coin collection, with my hope that he will use this opportunity to build something meaningful of his own. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Marcus blinked several times, processing what he'd just heard. $100,000 was substantial, but it represented a fraction of William's total wealth. I don't understand, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Where's the rest? The business, the house, the properties? Father O'Connor's expression remained neutral as he continued reading. The remainder of my estate, including Ashford Construction, the family residence at 847 Maple Street, all rental properties, investment accounts, and remaining assets totaling approximately $3.2 million, I leave entirely to my stepdaughter, Sarah Michelle Barrett. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the priest as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. Jennifer's mouth fell open in shock. Even Margaret looked stunned by this unexpected turn. I felt the blood drain from my face as the full impact of Father O'Connor's words hit me. William had left me everything. Everything that Marcus had spent his entire life expecting to inherit was now mine. This is impossible, Marcus finally managed to say, his voice growing stronger with anger. There has to be a mistake. She's not even family. She's not an Ashford. She's not his blood. Father O'Connor looked directly at Marcus with the patient expression of a man who dealt with difficult situations throughout his ministry.
I understand this comes as a surprise, but I can assure you the will is legally valid and reflects William's true wishes." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is insane. Dad would never do this. Sarah, you must have manipulated him somehow. Maybe when he was sick or confused or—" "Marcus," Margaret said firmly, her teacher's voice cutting through his accusations. "That's enough." But Marcus was beyond reason now. His face had flushed red and his hands were clenched into fists. "You want to know what I think? I think she saw an opportunity when Dad got sick and took advantage of an old man's weakness. This whole thing is a fraud." Jennifer reached out to touch her husband's arm, trying to calm him, but he shook him off. The twins had stopped coloring and were watching their father with wide, frightened eyes. "Daddy? Daddy, why are you yelling?" But Marcus wasn't listening to his daughter. He was staring at me with pure hatred, as if I'd personally stolen something that belonged to him. "You're not even family," he repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "You never were. You were just some kid Mom felt sorry for, and Dad went along with it to keep the peace. But you're not an Ashford, and you never will be." The words hit me like physical blows, each one designed to wound. But underneath the pain was something else. Confusion. Why would William do this? Why would he leave everything to me instead of his biological son?
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Father O'Connor was watching this exchange with growing concern, but he allowed Marcus to vent his anger before speaking again. "There's more," the priest said quietly. "William included a personal letter explaining his decision." Father O'Connor reached for the handwritten letter, his weathered fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded the cream-colored stationery that bore William's distinctive script. The priest's eyes scanned the page briefly before looking up at our expectant faces. "William asked me to read this aloud to everyone present," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "These are his words, written in his own hand 3 days before he passed away." Marcus had returned to his seat, though his entire body remained rigid with barely contained fury. Jennifer kept glancing between her husband and the twins, clearly wishing she could remove the children from this increasingly uncomfortable situation. Margaret sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, waiting with the patience that came from decades of dealing with family drama in her role as an educator. The priest began reading in his measured, pastoral tone. "My dear family, if you're hearing this letter, then I've already begun my journey to meet my beloved Rebecca in whatever comes next. I know my decisions regarding my estate will come as a shock to some of you, particularly to Marcus, and I owe you all an explanation." He paused, allowing the weight of William's words to settle over the room before continuing. "Marcus, my son, I want you to understand that this decision comes from love, not disappointment. You've built a successful business through your own efforts, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished. The money I've left you will provide additional security for your family, but you've already proven you don't need my help to succeed in this world." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on the priest's face. "Sarah, my dear girl, you may be surprised to learn that I've been planning this for several years. When your mother married me 16 years ago, she brought more than just her loving heart into our family. She brought you. A daughter who accepted a stepfather's love with grace and kindness, even when that acceptance wasn't always returned by others in our family." I felt tears beginning to gather in my eyes. William had always been kind to me, but I'd never realized he viewed our relationship in such meaningful terms. Father O'Connor continued reading. "Over the years, I watched Sarah navigate the challenges of being the outsider in our family dynamic. She never complained when Arcus made it clear she didn't belong. She never demanded attention or special treatment. She simply lived her life with quiet dignity, working hard, caring for her mother during her illness, and maintaining her integrity even when it would have been easier to walk away from us all after Rebecca's death." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, perhaps recognizing the truth in his father's observations about his treatment of me over the years.
I've made this decision because Sarah represents the values I hope to pass on: humility, perseverance, and genuine care for others. She's never asked for anything from our family, which is precisely why she deserves everything I can give her. Marcus has had every advantage, every opportunity, and my constant support throughout his life. Sarah has had to create her own path with minimal help from anyone. The letter continued with details about William's hopes for the construction business. He'd included specific instructions for maintaining relationships with longtime employees and continuing the company's tradition of supporting local charities. He'd also expressed his desire for Sarah to use the family home to create something positive for the community, though he left the specific details to her discretion. Finally, Father O'Connor read, "I want to address something that may seem unusual. 3 months ago, I began the legal process of formally adopting Sarah as my daughter. The paperwork was completed just 2 weeks before my death. She is now, legally and officially, Sarah Michelle Ashford, my daughter in every sense that matters." The words hit the room like a thunderbolt. Marcus's face went completely white, then flushed red again as the implication sunk in. Not only had William left me his entire estate, but he'd also legally made me his daughter. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. Deep down, he was beginning to understand that his father had been far more deliberate in his planning than anyone had realized. Father O'Connor set down the letter and reached for another document from the manila envelope. "Here's the adoption decree, signed by Judge Harrison on September 15th. Sarah, you are now legally William's daughter and heir." I stared at the official document bearing my new legal name. William had never mentioned his intention to adopt me. We'd continued our normal routine, occasional dinners, brief conversations about work or the weather, his gentle inquiries about whether I was dating anyone or needed help with anything around my apartment. "But why didn't he tell anyone?" Jennifer asked, speaking for the first time since the reading began. Her voice was small, confused rather than angry.
Margaret answered before Father O'Connor could respond. "Because he knew exactly what kind of reaction it would create," she said, looking directly at her nephew. "William was never one for confrontation, but he was also never one to let injustice stand when he could do something about it." Marcus stood again, this time moving toward the window that overlooked Main Street. His shoulders were shaking slightly, and I realized he was crying. Not the angry tears of a thwarted inheritance, but something deeper, the grief of a son realizing he'd fundamentally misunderstood his father's heart. "I treated her terribly," he said, without turning around. "For 16 years, I made sure she knew she didn't belong. And Dad saw all of it." Jennifer rose and went to stand beside her husband, placing a gentle hand on his back. The twins had resumed their coloring, but they were working quietly, sensing the emotional weight of the adult conversation happening around them. "Your father loved you, Marcus," Father O'Connor said, kindly. "This decision wasn't about punishment. It was about justice, and perhaps about teaching a lesson that needed to be learned." The priest gathered the documents and returned them to his briefcase. "Sarah, there are practical matters we'll need to discuss regarding the transfer of assets. The construction business has several ongoing projects that will require your attention, and there are employees who will need reassurance about their job security." The reality of my new situation was beginning to sink in. I wasn't just inheriting money or property, I was inheriting responsibility for dozens of people's livelihoods. Williams' construction company employed 43 people, from skilled carpenters to administrative staff. The rental properties housed 26 families throughout Millbrook Heights. "I don't know anything about running a construction business," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "William anticipated that concern," Father O'Connor replied, consulting his notes. "He recommended that you retain Robert Chen as general manager. Robert has been with the company for 12 years and understands every aspect of the operation. William trusted him completely." Robert Chen was Mrs. Chen's son, whose books I'd been reviewing just days earlier.
The interconnected nature of small-town life was revealing itself in ways I'd never fully appreciated. "There's also this," the priest added, handing me a sealed envelope with my name written in William's handwriting. "He asked me to give this to you privately, but said you could share it with others if you chose to do so." Marcus turned back from the window, his eyes red, but his expression more composed. "I owe you an apology, Sarah. Actually, I owe you 16 years' worth of apologies." The admission surprised me. Marcus had never shown any inclination toward self-reflection, let alone remorse for his behavior. "I convinced myself that treating you like an outsider was protecting what belonged to my family. But Dad was right. You were family. You became family the day you and your mom moved into our house, and I was too selfish and stupid to see it." Jennifer nodded encouragingly at her husband, proud of his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes. "I understand if you can't forgive me," Marcus said. "I understand if you want nothing to do with any of us going forward. But I want you to know that my girls are going to learn about their Aunt Sarah, and they're going to understand that family isn't always about blood." Chloe looked up from her coloring book at the mention of her name. "Is Sarah our aunt now?" she asked, with the innocent curiosity of an 8-year-old. "She's always been your aunt, sweetheart," Jennifer said softly. "We just forgot to tell you." Father O'Connor stood, signaling that the formal reading was concluded. "Sarah, would you like me to arrange a meeting with Robert Chen and the company's accountant? I think it would be helpful for you to understand the scope of what you've inherited before making any major decisions." I nodded, still struggling to process the magnitude of the changes in my life. That morning, I'd been Sarah Barrett, a small-town accountant living paycheck to paycheck. Now I was Sarah Ashford, the owner of a multi-million-dollar construction business and half a dozen rental properties. Margaret approached me as the others prepared to leave. "Your mother would be so proud," she said, embracing me warmly. "Rebecca always knew you were special. She used to tell William that you had an old soul and a generous heart." "I miss her every day," I confessed, returning the older woman's embrace. "She's not really gone," Margaret replied. "I see her in your kindness, your strength, and your grace under pressure. William saw it too, which is why he made the decision he did." As the family members filed out of the conference room, Marcus lingered near the doorway. "Sarah, when you're ready, when you've had time to think about everything, would you consider having dinner with Jennifer and me? With the girls? I'd like to try to be the brother I should have been all along."
The offer was unexpected, but something in his voice suggested genuine remorse rather than calculated manipulation. "Maybe," I said. "Let me figure out what I'm supposed to do with a construction company first." He smiled sadly. "Dad always said you were the smartest person he knew. If anyone can figure it out, it's you." After everyone had gone, I remained in the conference room with Father O'Connor, staring at the sealed envelope that contained William's final personal message to me. "Are you ready to read it?" the priest asked gently. "I think so," I replied, though my hands were trembling as I broke the seal. The envelope felt heavier than it should have as I carefully opened it, revealing 3 handwritten pages in William's precise script. Father O'Connor had moved to the window, giving me privacy, while remaining available if I needed support. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then Father O'Connor has successfully navigated what I imagine was a very difficult conversation with our family. I hope Marcus didn't say anything too harsh, though knowing my son, I suspect he expressed his shock in ways that hurt you." I could almost hear William's gentle voice as I read his words, the same tone he'd used when teaching me to drive or helping me prepare for job interviews after college. "There are things I need to tell you that I never found the courage to say while I was alive. Your mother made me promise, shortly before she died, that I would always look out for you. But Sarah, the truth is that you've been looking out for me far more than I ever looked out for you." The letter went on to describe moments I'd forgotten, or never realized William had noticed. The time I'd quietly paid for groceries when he was short on cash after a medical emergency. The way I'd organize his medication schedule when he was recovering from surgery. The countless small acts of consideration that I'd performed without thinking, never expecting recognition or reciprocity. You have your mother's heart, he continued. But you also have a strength that's entirely your own. When Rebecca was dying, I watched you hold our family together while dealing with your own grief. You made sure I ate, you handled the insurance paperwork, you coordinated with the hospice nurses, and you did it all while working full-time and managing your own life. I remembered those final months of my mother's illness as a blur of hospital visits and difficult conversations with doctors. I hadn't realized William had been observing my efforts to keep everyone functioning during such a painful time. The construction business needs someone with your integrity and attention to detail. Robert Chen is an excellent manager, but the company needs an owner who truly cares about the employees and their families. I've watched you interact with people throughout this community, and I know you'll make decisions based on what's right, not just what's profitable. William's letter included specific details about the company's finances and ongoing projects. The business was in excellent condition, with steady contracts and a reputation for quality work that had been built over decades. He'd also diversified into property management, which provided stable rental income that could support the construction side during slower periods. I need you to know something about the adoption, the letter continued, shifting to a more personal tone. I didn't do it just to ensure you'd inherit everything. I did it because you've been my daughter in every way that matters since the day you and Rebecca came into my life. Making it legal was simply acknowledging a truth that already existed. Tears were flowing freely down my cheeks now, and I had to pause to compose myself before continuing. Marcus has always struggled with sharing attention or affection. Even as a child, he demanded to be the center of everything. I enabled that behavior because I felt guilty about his mother leaving when he was young. I thought if I gave him everything he wanted, it would somehow make up for the pain she caused him. This was the first time anyone had ever explained Marcus's hostility toward me in terms of his own childhood trauma. His mother had left when he was 7, abandoning both him and William without explanation or subsequent contact. I realize now that my indulgence did Marcus more harm than good. By allowing him to treat you as an outsider, I failed both of you. I failed to teach him how to be a generous, welcoming person, and I failed to protect you from his coldness. The letter revealed that William had been planning this inheritance decision for over 3 years, carefully documenting my character and contributions to the family, while also observing Marcus's continued inability to treat me with basic respect. I hope this inheritance will serve multiple purposes. I hope it will provide you with the security and opportunities you deserve. I hope it will force Marcus to confront his own behavior and perhaps become a better person. And I hope it will allow you to create something meaningful that benefits our entire community. Father O'Connor approached as I finished reading, offering a box of tissues from the conference room's side table. "Are you all right?" he asked with genuine concern.
I think so, I replied, though my voice was shaky. It's just overwhelming. This morning I was worried about making rent next month, and now you're responsible for a legacy that William spent his entire adult life building, the priest finished. It's natural to feel overwhelmed. He sat back down across from me, his expression thoughtful. William talked to me extensively about this decision. He was confident you could handle the responsibility, but he also knew you'd need support during the transition. What kind of support? I asked, grateful that William had anticipated my concerns. Robert Chen has agreed to stay on as general manager for at least 2 years, with the understanding that he'll teach you everything you need to know about the construction business. Margaret has offered to help with the property management side, since she has experience with budgets and organizational systems from her years as a principal. The practical aspects of my inheritance were beginning to seem more manageable with this kind of assistance, but there were still emotional hurdles to navigate. What about Marcus? William seems to think this will help him become a better person, but what if it just makes him hate me more? Father O'Connor considered this carefully before responding. Marcus's reaction today surprised me. I expected anger, but I didn't expect the self-reflection that followed.
Perhaps losing what he thought was guaranteed will help him appreciate what he actually has. We spent another hour discussing the immediate steps I'd need to take. The construction company had payroll due the following week, and there were client meetings scheduled that would require my presence, or at least my authorization for Robert to proceed with various projects. "There's one more thing," Father O'Connor said as we prepared to leave. "William asked me to give you this key and this address." He handed me an old brass key and a slip of paper with an address I didn't recognize. "What is it?" "He said you'd understand when you saw it, and that you should go there when you were ready to fully embrace your new role in this community." The mystery address would have to wait. I needed to go home and process everything that had happened before taking on any additional surprises. My apartment felt strange when I returned that afternoon. The modest one-bedroom space that had been my sanctuary suddenly seemed inadequate for someone who now owned a Victorian mansion and a construction empire. But it also felt like the last connection to my old life, before William's generosity had transformed my entire existence. I called in sick to work the next day, something I'd never done unless I was genuinely ill. Instead, I drove to the construction company's offices on Industrial Boulevard, a sprawling complex of warehouse buildings and administrative offices that I'd passed countless times without ever imagining I'd someday own it. Robert Chen met me in the parking lot, his expression mixing sympathy for my loss with curiosity about my intentions. At 42, Robert had the weathered hands and practical demeanor of someone who'd spent decades in construction, but his business education was evident in the way he discussed financial projections and client relationships. "Your father was a good man," he said, simply, as we walked toward the main office building. "He treated all of us like family, not just employees." The office tour revealed the scope of Williams' business operations. Ashford Construction employed carpenters, electricians, plumbers, and general laborers, along with project managers, estimators, and administrative staff. They were currently working on 12 active projects, ranging from home renovations to a new medical clinic on the outskirts of town. "The business is solid," Robert explained as we reviewed the financial statements in William's private office. "We've got contracts booked through next spring, and our reputation means we usually have more work available than we can handle." William's office was a reflection of his personality. Organized but comfortable, with family photos mixed among industry awards and project completion certificates. A picture of my mother and I from a Christmas celebration 5 years earlier sat prominently on his desk, right next to similar photos of Marcus's family. "He talked about you a lot," Robert said, noticing my attention to the photograph. "He was proud of how you'd built your career in accounting, and he often said he wished he could find a way to involve you in the business." "Did you know about his plans for the inheritance?" I asked. Robert nodded. "He discussed it with me about 6 months ago. He wanted to make sure I'd be willing to help you learn the business if something happened to him. I told him I'd be honored to work with his daughter." The phrase, "his daughter," still felt strange, but I was beginning to understand that William's adoption hadn't been a legal technicality. It had been the formalization of a relationship that everyone else had recognized long before I did. We spent the morning reviewing ongoing projects and meeting key employees. The foremen and skilled workers were respectful but reserved, clearly wondering whether the boss's stepdaughter would maintain William's standards and values. The administrative staff, most of whom were women around my age, seemed more openly welcoming. "There's going to be an adjustment period," Robert acknowledged as we finished the office tour. "Some of the guys have been here for 15 or 20 years. They're going to test you to see if you're serious about learning the business or just planning to sell everything off." "I'm not selling," I said firmly, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "William built something important here, and I want to honor that." Robert smiled for the first time that morning. "That's exactly what he hoped you'd say." After leaving the construction office, I drove to the mysterious address Father O'Connor had given me. It turned out to be a small building on Pine Street, just 2 blocks from the downtown square. The brass key opened a door that revealed a completely renovated space with hardwood floors, exposed brick walls, and large windows that flooded the interior with natural light. A handwritten note was taped to the wall near the entrance. "Sarah, This space has been waiting for whatever dream you've been too practical to pursue. Now you have the resources to make it happen. Love always, Dad. The word Dad, written in William's handwriting, nearly undid me completely. He'd never asked me to call him that, and I'd never presumed to use the title, but seeing it there, in his own script, felt like final permission to acknowledge the relationship we'd actually had all along. Standing in that empty space, I began to envision possibilities I'd never allowed myself to consider before. 3 weeks after the will reading, I found myself sitting in the mahogany-paneled study of the Victorian house that was now officially mine. The transition had been surreal. One day I was cramming my belongings into a studio apartment, and the next I was rattling around in a 4-bedroom home with original hardwood floors and a wraparound porch that William had lovingly maintained for over 2 decades. The house held memories in every corner. The kitchen where my mother had taught me to make her famous apple pie, the living room where William had patiently helped me with calculus homework during my senior year of high school, the back porch where we'd spent countless summer evenings discussing everything, from local politics to my career aspirations. But tonight, I wasn't dwelling on nostalgia. I was preparing for what might be the most important meeting of my new life as Sarah Ashford, business owner and community member. Marcus had called that afternoon, his voice carefully controlled, asking if we could finally have that dinner conversation he'd mentioned at the lawyer's office. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of learning experiences. Robert Chen had proven to be an invaluable guide through the complexities of construction management. Together, we'd visited every active job site where I'd met the crews and tried to understand the intricacies of each project. The medical clinic was ahead of schedule, thanks to favorable weather and an experienced team of electricians. The Henderson family's home renovation had hit a snag when we discovered outdated plumbing that needed complete replacement, but Mrs. Henderson had been understanding when I personally explained the delay and the additional costs involved. The key, Robert had told me during one of our site visits, is transparency and reliability. Your father built this business on the principle that clients should never be surprised by problems or costs. If something goes wrong, you tell them immediately, and you present solutions, not just problems. I'd also discovered that William's property management portfolio was more extensive than I had initially realized. Beyond the residential rentals, he owned the building that housed Chen's Bakery, the downtown space that was now mine to develop, and 3 small office buildings that provided steady income from local businesses and professional services. Margaret had been instrumental in helping me understand the financial side of property management. Her experience managing school budgets had given her insights into cash flow and maintenance planning that translated perfectly to real estate management. The secret, she'd explained during one of our weekend sessions reviewing tenant agreements and maintenance records, is preventative care. William always said it was cheaper to fix small problems before they became big ones. Every property gets inspected twice a year, and every tenant knows they can call about issues without being treated like they're bothering anyone.
But the most significant development had been my gradual recognition of how William's businesses functioned as integral parts of the Millbrook Heights community. The construction company had built or renovated nearly a third of the homes in town over the past 20 years. The rental properties provided affordable housing for young families, elderly residents on fixed incomes, and newcomers who weren't ready to purchase homes. William had apparently operated both businesses with a philosophy that prioritized community benefit alongside profit. The doorbell interrupted my reflection, and I felt my stomach tighten with nervousness. Through the front window, I could see Marcus standing on the porch with Jennifer and the twins, all of them dressed more casually than I'd ever seen them. Chloe was carrying a small wrapped package, and Emma had what appeared to be a handmade card. "Hello, Sarah," Marcus said when I opened the door. His voice was quieter than usual, lacking the confident boom that had characterized most of our previous interactions. "Thank you for agreeing to this." Jennifer stepped forward with a warm smile that seemed genuinely friendly rather than politely distant. "We brought dessert," she said, holding up a bakery box from Chen's. "Emma insisted we get the chocolate cake because she remembered Grandpa William saying it was your favorite." The fact that Emma had remembered such a small detail about my preferences touched me more than I expected.
During family gatherings, the twins had rarely interacted with me directly, but apparently they'd been more observant than I realized. That was very thoughtful, I said, accepting the box and ushering them into the living room. Would anyone like coffee or tea? I'll help you, Jennifer offered, following me toward the kitchen while Marcus helped the girls remove their coats. In the kitchen, Jennifer's demeanor became more serious. I owe you an apology too, she said quietly. I've never been unkind to you directly, but I've also never made any effort to include you in our family activities. I followed Marcus's lead instead of thinking for myself about what kind of person I wanted to be. Her honesty was refreshing and unexpected. I never held that against you, I replied. Family dynamics are complicated, and you were trying to support your husband. Maybe, but I should have been supporting what was right instead of what was comfortable. We returned to the living room to find Marcus sitting stiffly on William's favorite armchair while the twins explored the built-in bookshelves with obvious fascination. "Daddy, look at all these books!" Chloe exclaimed, running her finger along the spines of William's extensive collection of historical biographies and mystery novels. "Your grandpa was a big reader," Marcus said, his voice softening as he watched his daughter's excitement. "He used to read to me from those books when I was about your age." Emma approached me with her handmade card, suddenly shy. "I made this for you," she said, holding out a construction paper creation decorated with crayon drawings of houses and flowers. The card's message, written in careful second-grade handwriting, read, "Dear Aunt Sarah, I'm sorry we didn't know you were our family before. Love, Emma." "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely moved by the child's gesture. "I'm going to put it in the refrigerator so I can see it every day." Emma beamed at this response and immediately began describing each element of her artwork in elaborate detail. Her enthusiasm broke some of the tension in the room, and I found myself relaxing for the first time since they'd arrived. Dinner conversation started awkwardly, with Marcus clearly struggling to find a balance between acknowledging his past behavior and moving forward with a different dynamic. But the twins' natural curiosity about the house and their memories of visiting their grandfather created opportunities for more comfortable exchanges. "Grandpa used to let us help him in his workshop," Chloe said, referring to the basement space where William had maintained a small woodworking setup. "He was teaching us how to make birdhouses." "The workshop is still exactly as he left it. Maybe sometime you'd like to finish those birdhouses." The suggestion delighted both girls, who immediately began planning elaborate designs for their projects. Marcus watched this interaction with an expression I'd never seen before. Genuine gratitude mixed with what appeared to be relief. After the twins had settled in the living room with a movie, the three adults moved to the kitchen for more serious conversation.
"I've been doing a lot of thinking," Marcus began, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug as if it could provide courage. "About Dad, about our family, about the way I've treated you for so many years." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "I convinced myself that you were a threat to my relationship with Dad, but the truth is that I was threatened by your character. You never asked for anything, never demanded attention, never created drama or conflict. You just quietly lived your life with integrity, and that made me feel inadequate." Jennifer reached over and squeezed her husband's hand encouragingly. "I spent so much energy trying to prove I was the real son that I forgot to actually be a good son," Marcus continued. "Dad tried to teach me about generosity, about treating people fairly, about using my advantages to help others instead of just helping myself. But I was too busy protecting my territory to learn those lessons." "Your father loved you," I said gently. "Even when he was disappointed in your behavior, he never stopped loving you." "I know that now," Marcus replied. "The inheritance wasn't about punishment. It was about consequences. Dad was trying to teach me something I should have learned decades ago." He looked directly at me for the first time since they'd arrived. "I want to start over, if you'll let me. I want to be the brother I should have been all along. And I want my daughters to grow up understanding that family is about how you treat people, not just about blood relations."
The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and I found myself genuinely moved by his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes so completely. "I'd like that," I said. "But I need you to understand that building trust is going to take time. 16 years of feeling like an outsider doesn't disappear overnight." "I understand," he said. "I'm not expecting forgiveness immediately. I'm just hoping for the chance to earn it." Jennifer had been listening quietly, but now she leaned forward with obvious interest. "Can I ask what you're planning to do with the downtown space? The girls and I walked past it yesterday, and they were so curious about what it might become." I'd been developing ideas about the Pine Street property, but I hadn't discussed them with anyone yet. "I'm thinking about turning it into a community center," I said, testing how the words sounded when spoken aloud. "Maybe a place where people could take classes, hold meetings, or just gather for social activities. Millbrook Heights doesn't really have anything like that right now." Marcus's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "That's a brilliant idea. There are so many people in this town who would benefit from something like that. Seniors who need more social interaction, kids who need safe after-school activities, adults who want to learn new skills."
The construction company could handle the renovations, he added, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to assume you'd want my help with anything." "Actually," I said slowly, "I've been wondering if you might be interested in taking on some projects for the business. Robert mentioned that we sometimes need to subcontract specialty work, and your experience with high-end residential properties could be valuable." The suggestion clearly surprised Marcus. "You'd be willing to work with me professionally?" "William's letter mentioned that he hoped the situation would help you become a better person," I said. "Maybe working together on community projects could be part of that process, for both of us." We spent the next hour discussing possibilities for the community center and potential collaboration between my inherited construction business and Marcus's development company. The conversation revealed sides of Marcus I'd never seen: his genuine excitement about creating spaces that served people's needs, his detailed knowledge of accessibility requirements and community planning principles. As the evening concluded and they prepared to leave, Emma approached me with another question that had obviously been weighing on her mind. "Aunt Sarah, are you going to live in Grandpa's house forever?" "I think so. It's a big house, and I'd like to fill it with family and friends who want to visit." "Can we visit sometimes?" Chloe asked hopefully. "Any time you want," I assured her, and meant it completely. After they left, I sat in William's study, surrounded by the books and photographs that documented a life well lived. The evening had exceeded my expectations in every way, offering hope for relationships I'd never thought possible, and collaborations that could benefit the entire community. But as I prepared for bed, I realized that the most significant transformation hadn't been in Marcus's attitude or Jennifer's acceptance. It had been in my own growing confidence that I could honor William's legacy while creating something uniquely my own. 6 months after the will reading, I stood in the nearly completed community center on Pine Street, watching Marcus and his crew install the final light fixtures in what would soon be Millbrook Heights' first dedicated public gathering space. The transformation of the empty building had exceeded even my most optimistic expectations, evolving from William's mysterious gift into something that truly served the town's needs. The morning sun streamed through the large windows that Marcus had suggested we expand, illuminating hardwood floors that had been refinished by Robert Chen's most skilled craftsmen. The main hall could accommodate up to 60 people for presentations or social events, while 3 smaller rooms provided spaces for classes, meetings, and quiet activities. A commercial-grade kitchen would allow for community dinners and cooking classes, and a children's area featured built-in storage for toys and art supplies. "The sound system is working perfectly," called out David Martinez, one of Marcus's electricians, as he tested the wireless microphones we'd installed for presentations and performances. The past 6 months had brought changes I never could have anticipated. The construction business had thrived under my ownership, with Robert Chen and I developing an efficient partnership that honored William's legacy while incorporating new ideas and technologies.
We'd completed the medical clinic project 2 weeks ahead of schedule, earning praise from Dr. Patricia Williams and her staff, who were eager to begin serving patients in their modern facility. More importantly, the business had become a vehicle for community improvement in ways that went beyond simple construction projects. When the town's only playground equipment was condemned due to safety concerns, Ashford Construction donated the labor to install new playground structures, with materials funded through a combination of town budget allocations and private donations I'd quietly arranged. The rental properties had also evolved under my management, though the changes were more subtle. I'd instituted a policy of routine upgrades that improved energy efficiency and comfort for tenants, while keeping rental rates affordable for working families and seniors. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an 83-year-old widow who'd lived in one of Williams' properties for over a decade, had been delighted when I'd arranged for the installation of grab bars in her bathroom and a ramp for her front steps. "You're just like your father," she'd told me when I'd stopped by to check on the modifications, "always thinking about what people need before they have to ask for it." The relationship with Marcus had continued to improve steadily, though we'd both acknowledged that rebuilding trust after 16 years of dysfunction required patience and consistent effort. His involvement in the community center project had revealed aspects of his personality that had been overshadowed by his earlier selfishness and insecurity. "I've been thinking about what Dad wrote in that letter, about me having every advantage and opportunity. I spent so much time taking those advantages for granted that I forgot they came with responsibilities." His development company had begun partnering with Ashford Construction on projects that prioritized community benefit alongside profit. Together, we'd renovated the town's aging fire station, updated the public library's accessibility features, and created affordable housing options for young families who wanted to stay in Millbrook Heights but couldn't afford traditional home purchases. Jennifer had become an unexpected ally and friend, offering insights into community needs that came from her involvement in school activities and neighborhood organizations. She'd suggested the community center include a dedicated space for tutoring and homework assistance, recognizing that many local families struggled to provide adequate academic support for their children. "There are so many kids who could succeed if they just had a quiet place to study and access to someone who could help them when they're confused," she'd explained during one of our planning sessions. "The school does what it can, but teachers are already stretched thin." The twins had become regular visitors to both the construction sites and the Victorian house, which had gradually transformed from Williams' bachelor sanctuary into a genuine family gathering place. Chloe and Emma had completed their birdhouse projects in Williams' workshop, with guidance from Robert Chen, who'd proven surprisingly patient with their enthusiastic but imprecise carpentry skills. "Grandpa would be so proud of these," they had declared when they'd finished painting their creations in bright primary colors that definitely prioritized enthusiasm over artistic sophistication.
Margaret had remained actively involved in the property management side of my inheritance, but she'd also become something approaching a surrogate grandmother figure. Her decades of experience dealing with teenagers had prepared her well for helping me navigate the complexities of running businesses while maintaining personal relationships. "The secret," she'd told me during one of our regular coffee meetings, "is remembering that every decision you make affects real people's lives. Your father never forgot that, and it's why people trusted him even when they disagreed with his choices." Father O'Connor had continued serving as an informal advisor, offering guidance that drew from his years of counseling families through difficult transitions. His presence at the will reading had been just the beginning of his role in helping our family heal old wounds and create new possibilities. William's plan worked better than even he might have expected, the priest had observed during a recent conversation. He wanted to teach Marcus about humility and responsibility while giving you the resources to make a difference in this community. Both goals have been accomplished beyond what anyone could have hoped. The community center's grand opening was scheduled for the following weekend,
with a celebration that would showcase the various programs and activities we'd planned. Local artists would display their work in the main hall. The Millbrook Heights Historical Society would present a timeline of the town's development. Children's activities would include face painting and craft projects organized by Jennifer and several other parent volunteers.
But the event I was most excited about was the dedication ceremony itself. Margaret had suggested we create a memorial corner honoring William's contributions to the community, featuring photographs from various construction projects and testimonials from families who'd been helped by his generosity over the years. Dad would have been embarrassed by all the attention, Marcus had said when we'd discussed the memorial plans, but he also would have been proud to see how his values are continuing through what we're building together. The relationship between Marcus and I had evolved into something resembling genuine siblinghood, complete with occasional disagreements about project priorities and good-natured competition over whose ideas were more practical. But the foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose had proven strong enough to support these normal family dynamics.
I keep waiting for you to make some terrible business decision that proves you don't deserve Dad's trust, Marcus had joked during a recent site visit. But instead, you keep making choices that are smarter than anything I would have thought of. Maybe that's because I'm not trying to prove anything, I replied. I'm just trying to honor what William built, while making it my own. The Pine Street property had also sparked interest from other business owners who were considering investments in downtown Millbrook Heights. Chen's Bakery was planning an expansion that would add a small cafe area, and Dr. Williams had inquired about establishing a satellite clinic that could provide basic healthcare services without requiring trips to the larger medical facility. Your father always believed that success should lift up entire communities, not just individuals, Robert Chen had observed, as we'd watched the downtown revitalization efforts gain momentum. What you've created here is proof that his philosophy works. As I walked through the completed community center, checking last-minute details before the grand opening, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that shocking morning in the lawyer's office. The scared, uncertain woman who had inherited a business she didn't understand had evolved into someone who could confidently make decisions that affected dozens of employees and hundreds of community members. But the most significant transformation had been internal. I'd stopped seeing myself as the outsider who'd accidentally stumbled into a family where she didn't belong. Instead, I'd embraced my identity as Sarah Ashford, William's daughter in every sense that mattered, and a person whose values and choices could honor his memory while creating something uniquely her own. The evening before the grand opening, I hosted a family dinner at the Victorian House, a gathering that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. Marcus and Jennifer arrived with the twins, who immediately ran to the kitchen to help with final preparations. Margaret came bearing her famous apple crisp, made from a recipe she'd shared with my mother years earlier. Father O'Connor joined us after evening mass, bringing stories about parishioners who were excited about the new community programs. Even Robert Chen and his wife Linda attended, along with their teenage son Michael, who'd been volunteering at the construction sites during summer vacation and showing genuine interest in learning the family business. As we gathered around William's dining room table, the same table where I'd felt like an uncomfortable intruder during countless holiday meals, I realized that we'd created something William had always hoped for but never quite achieved. We'd become a real family, bound together by shared values and mutual affection, rather than just legal obligations or social expectations. I want to propose a toast, Marcus said, raising his wine glass as dinner concluded, to Sarah, who took Dad's greatest gift and turned it into something even more valuable than he could have imagined, and to Dad, who somehow knew exactly what all of us needed, even when we didn't know it ourselves. To William, Margaret added, who understood that the best way to teach love is to demonstrate it, even when the demonstration takes forms people don't expect.
Because Patricia Ashford left behind a substantial estate of her own, Brennan replied,
and her will contains some very specific provisions regarding William's children and their inheritances. He handed me a copy of Patricia's will, pointing to a section that had been highlighted in yellow. As I read the legal language, my confusion deepened rather than clarified. I don't understand what this means, I admitted. Brennan leaned forward, his expression grave. Patricia's will establishes a trust fund that becomes active only if certain conditions are met. Specifically, it requires that William's estate be divided equally between his biological children and any legally adopted children. The implication hit me like a physical blow. She's trying to force a redistribution of William's inheritance? That's exactly what she's trying to do, Brennan confirmed. Her will includes a provision that challenges the validity of your inheritance on the grounds that William's decision to leave everything to you constituted an unfair disinheritance of his biological son. I stared at the legal document, trying to process the implications. But William's will was completely legal. You said so yourself. The adoption was finalized. Everything was properly witnessed and filed. Absolutely correct, Brennan agreed. Your inheritance is completely valid under Oregon law. But Patricia's estate is now threatening to fund a legal challenge that could tie up William's assets in probate court for years. The thought of losing everything I'd built, everything William had entrusted to me, was devastating. But even worse was the realization of what this would mean for the community programs, the business employees, and the ongoing projects that depended on stable funding. How much money are we talking about? I asked. Patricia's estate is valued at approximately $1.8 million, Brennan replied. Her lawyers are suggesting that this money could be used to fund litigation that would force you to split William's inheritance equally with Marcus, or it could be distributed directly to Marcus if he agrees to challenge your inheritance. Does Marcus know about this? That's where things get interesting, Brennan said, a slight smile crossing his face for the first time since I had arrived. Attorney Rodriguez contacted Marcus directly before reaching out to me. According to her notes, Marcus refused their offer and told them he had no interest in challenging your inheritance or accepting money from his mother's estate. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by gratitude for Marcus's loyalty. The brotherhood once claimed I wasn't family was now actively protecting my inheritance from legal challenge. So the threat is over. Not necessarily, Brendan said, his expression becoming serious again. Patricia's will includes a secondary provision. If Marcus refuses to challenge your inheritance, the money goes to a charitable foundation whose stated purpose is to ensure fair inheritance practices for biological families. What does that mean in practical terms? It means they can still fund litigation challenging your inheritance even without Marcus's cooperation. They're essentially gambling that they can force a settlement that would require you to pay Marcus a substantial sum to avoid years of expensive legal battles. I felt a surge of anger at the selfishness of a woman who'd abandoned her family decades earlier but was still trying to control their lives from beyond the grave. What are my options? I asked. Brennan consulted his notes before responding. We can fight the challenge in court, which we would almost certainly win eventually, but the process could take 2 to 3 years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Or we can try to negotiate a settlement that satisfies the foundation's requirements while protecting your interests. What kind of settlement? They're proposing that you voluntarily transfer half of William's estate to Marcus, which would satisfy their fairness criteria and cause them to withdraw their challenge. The suggestion was infuriating, not because I was unwilling to share with Marcus, but because external parties were trying to dictate how William's carefully planned legacy should be distributed. I need to talk to Marcus about this, I said. I think that's wise, Brennan agreed. But Sarah, I want you to understand something important. Regardless of what these people claim about fairness or biological family rights, William's will represents his true wishes. He spent months planning his estate distribution, and he chose you as his sole heir for reasons that were deeply personal and carefully considered. That evening, I called Marcus and asked if he could come to the Victorian house for a private conversation. When I explained the situation, His reaction was even stronger than I anticipated.
"That woman," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage, "abandoned me 30 years ago, and now she wants to destroy everything Dad built? She wants to tear apart our family again?" We were sitting in William's study, surrounded by the books and photographs that documented a life dedicated to family and community service. "The lawyers seem to think they have a legitimate legal claim," I said carefully. "I don't care what they think," Marcus replied. "Dad left you everything because he trusted your judgment and your character. He knew you'd use his legacy to help people, which is exactly what you've done. I'm not going to let some foundation destroy that because they think blood relationships are more important than actual family bonds." His loyalty was touching, but I could see the stress this situation was creating for him. The mother who'd rejected him was reaching out from the grave to create chaos in the life he'd worked so hard to rebuild. "There's something else we need to consider," I said gently. "If we fight this in court, it could take years to resolve. That means the construction business, the community center, all the projects we've planned, everything could be frozen until the litigation is finished." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "What are you thinking?" he asked finally. "I'm thinking that maybe we should consider a different kind of solution. Something that honors Dad's wishes while also protecting what we've built together." Over the next several days, I worked with Attorney Brennan to develop a proposal that none of the parties had anticipated. Instead of accepting the foundation's demands for a simple division of assets, I suggested a more complex arrangement that would satisfy their stated concerns while preserving William's intended legacy. The plan involved establishing a family foundation of our own, with Marcus and me serving as co-directors. Half of William's liquid assets would be transferred to this foundation, which would focus specifically on community development projects in Millbrook Heights and surrounding areas. The construction business would remain under my ownership, but Marcus's company would become the preferred contractor for all foundation projects, ensuring steady work and fair compensation for his efforts. The Victorian house would be converted into a retreat center for families dealing with adoption, foster care, and blended family challenges, a living memorial to William's belief that love rather than biology defines true family relationships. "It's brilliant," Brennan said when I presented the plan. "You're giving Marcus access to substantial resources while maintaining control over how William's legacy is used. The foundation's concerns about fairness are addressed, but you're not simply handing over assets to be used for purposes William wouldn't have supported." More importantly, the plan would allow us to expand our community impact far beyond what either of us could accomplish individually. The foundation could fund projects like affordable housing, educational programs, and healthcare initiatives that would benefit multiple communities throughout the region. When I presented the proposal to Marcus, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. "This is perfect," he said. "It gives us the resources to do the kind of work Dad always dreamed about, but on a much larger scale. And it protects everything you've built, while creating opportunities for both of us to contribute our strengths." The foundation's lawyers initially resisted our counterproposal, insisting that their client's will required a simple division of assets. But Attorney Rodriguez eventually acknowledged that our plan satisfied the legal requirements while creating a structure that would benefit far more people than a traditional inheritance split. "Your proposal is unusual," she admitted during a conference call, "but it demonstrates a level of thoughtfulness and community focus that's consistent with what Patricia's will was trying to achieve." 3 months later, the Ashford Family Foundation held its first board meeting in the converted study of the Victorian house. Marcus and I had been joined by Margaret, Father O'Connor, and Robert Chen as founding board members, creating a group with diverse perspectives and complementary expertise. Our first major project was the completion of the senior housing development, which would now include additional amenities like a community garden and transportation services for residents who could no longer drive safely. "Dad would be amazed," Marcus said as we reviewed architectural plans for the senior complex. "He always talked about wanting to do more for the community, but he never had the resources for projects this ambitious."
He had something better than resources, I replied. He had the vision to see what was possible and the patience to wait for the right time to make it happen. The legal challenge that had initially seemed so threatening had ultimately become an opportunity to expand William's legacy in directions he could never have imagined. Patricia's attempt to disrupt our family instead created a structure that would serve families throughout the region for generations to come.
But the most meaningful outcome was the deepening of the bond between Marcus and me. Working together to resolve the inheritance challenge had required trust, communication, and shared decision-making that had strengthened our relationship beyond anything I'd previously thought possible. "We make a good team," Marcus had observed during one of our foundation planning sessions. Dad knew that, even when we didn't. As I reflected on the year's events, I realized that William's greatest gift hadn't been the money or property he'd left me. It had been his unwavering belief in the power of love to transform people and communities. That belief had sustained me through the challenges of learning to run businesses I'd never expected to inherit. It had guided me through the process of building genuine family relationships with people who'd once seen me as an outsider. And it had provided the foundation for creating something larger and more meaningful than any individual inheritance. Standing in the community center one evening, watching children work on art projects while their parents attended financial literacy classes in the adjacent room, I understood that Patricia Ashford's final attempt to divide our family had instead revealed its true strength. We were bound together not by legal documents or shared genetics, but by shared values and mutual commitment to honoring the legacy of a man who'd understood that the best way to live was in service to others. The inheritance that had once seemed like an overwhelming responsibility had become the foundation for a life of purpose and meaning that exceeded anything I could have imagined for myself. And the family that had taken me in as a 12-year-old stepchild had finally become the loving, supportive community that William had always envisioned it could be. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing blueprints for the new medical training center. Robert Chen knocked on my office door, his expression unreadable as he held out the receiver. "It's someone from the White House," he said quietly. "They want to speak with you about something called the National Community Excellence Award." I stared at him for a moment, certain I'd misheard. "The White House?" That's what she said. Presidential staff. Taking the phone with trembling hands, I listened as a crisp professional voice explained that President Harrison wanted to recognize the Ashford Family Foundation's work as a model for rural community development. The ceremony would take place in 6 weeks, with national media coverage and representatives from communities across the country who are implementing similar programs. "Miss Ashford, your work has caught the attention of policymakers at the highest levels," the aide continued. "The president specifically wants to highlight how private citizens can create lasting change when they focus on collaboration rather than competition." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. The girl who'd once been dismissed as not even family was being invited to the White House to receive national recognition for community service. Marcus found me there 20 minutes later, still staring at the phone. "Robert said you got some kind of important call," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I said, "The president wants to give us an award. Next month, in Washington." Marcus blinked several times before grinning broadly. "Well, that's definitely going to impress the twins. Emma's been bragging to her friends that her aunt runs the coolest foundation in Oregon. Now she can add presidential award winner to the list." His easy acceptance of the honor reflected how much both of us had changed. Neither of us was interested in recognition for its own sake, but we'd learned to appreciate opportunities that could amplify our community's story and inspire others. "Will you come with me?" I asked. "The invitation includes family members, and I can't imagine doing this without you." "Try and stop me," he replied. "Jennifer's already planning what she's going to wear to meet the president." The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of media interviews and preparation meetings. Journalists visited Millbrook Heights to document our projects, speaking with residents whose lives had been transformed by programs we'd barely thought of as unusual. Mrs. Patterson, now 85 and still organizing activities at the senior complex, charmed a reporter from the Washington Post with her stories about community dinners and intergenerational mentoring programs. "These young people think they invented caring about neighbors, but Sarah and Marcus just figured out how to organize what we've always known how to do,"
she told the journalist with a mischievous smile. The ceremony itself was surreal. Standing in the East Room of the White House, surrounded by dignitaries and fellow award recipients, I kept thinking about William and how proud he would have been of this moment.
President Harrison's remarks focused on the power of ordinary citizens to create extraordinary change. The Ashford model proves that sustainable community development doesn't require massive government programs or corporate investment, she said. It requires people who believe in each other's potential and are willing to work together toward shared goals. During the reception afterward, I was approached by a woman from rural Mississippi who'd driven 16 hours to attend the ceremony. "My town is dying," she said simply. "Young people leave for college and never come back. Our downtown is full of empty buildings. But after reading about what you've done in Oregon, I think maybe there's hope for us too." We spent an hour discussing practical strategies for community engagement and economic development. By the end of our conversation, she had a notebook full of ideas and my promise to visit Mississippi within the next 6 months to see how we might adapt our model to different regional needs. That conversation reminded me why William's inheritance had been so much more than money or property. He'd given me the resources to prove that communities could transform themselves when people chose cooperation over competition and long-term benefit over short-term gain. Flying home to Oregon, I watched the landscape change from the monuments of Washington to the forests and farmland that had shaped my adult life. Marcus dozed in the seat beside me, exhausted by 3 days of meetings and presentations, but energized by the connections we'd made with community leaders from across the country. "I keep thinking about that morning in the lawyer's office," I said as we began our descent into Portland. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Marcus opened his eyes and considered the question seriously. "Honestly, no. I thought Dad was punishing me for being selfish and ungrateful. I never understood that he was actually giving both of us the chance to become better people. And now? Now, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew you'd use his legacy to help people. And he knew that watching you do it would teach me lessons I couldn't learn any other way." Landing in Portland felt like coming home in ways I'd never experienced as a child. This was the place where I'd learned to build businesses, strengthen families, and serve communities. It was where I discovered that the most meaningful inheritance isn't what you receive, but what you choose to do with whatever you've been given. The drive back to Millbrook Heights took us past landmarks that documented our journey. The senior housing complex where Miss Patterson still held court, the community center where teenagers tutored elementary students every afternoon, the downtown area where new businesses continued opening because they knew they'd find customers and support. As we pulled into the driveway of the Victorian house, I saw lights on in William's workshop. Emma and Chloe were inside working on some project that required their grandfather's tools and their father's supervision. The next generation was already learning that the most important legacy isn't what you inherit, but what you choose to do with others. Walking through the front door, I was greeted by the sounds and sights of a house that had finally become what William always intended it to be, the heart of a family bound together not by obligation, but by love, respect, and shared commitment to making the world a little better than they found it. The inheritance that had once seemed so overwhelming had become the foundation for a life I couldn't have imagined. And the brother who'd once claimed I wasn't family had become proof that the most powerful bonds are forged not by genetics, but by choice, forgiveness, and the patient work of learning to see each other clearly. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.